So the last myth is that World War II got us out of the Depression, and you'll see a lot of anti-Roosevelt sort of right-wing conservatives say this. They'll say, "Hey, it wasn't the New Deal; it was World War II." But that's actually sort of a contradiction, because if that's your view, if you say it wasn't Roosevelt, it was World War II, well, then you're still a Keynesian economist. You're still admitting that the government, by spending a bunch of money, you just happen to think it's spending it on tanks and bombers, is the way to fix a depression. And so, that there you're saying, oh, you don't want to spend money on bridges and public works, you want to spend money on tanks and bombers, and that's the way. So, in terms of the economic theory, if you believe World War II got us out of the Depression, you're a Keynesian economist. And so, maybe that's correct, but I just want to say a lot of conservative right-wing type people who hate FDR will advance this theory, not realizing that this is the theory, that endorses the economic theory they think that they're refuting. Okay, but the reality, of course, is that no, that's common sense. War is incredibly destructive. Any child would know that. Now maybe you need to fight World War II for military reasons, okay? So I'm not here saying whether World War II was good or bad in terms of strategic things and, ending the Holocaust and all that stuff. What I'm saying, though, is economically, if the country is already in a rut, you don't make things better by taking a lot of the able-bodied men and taking them out of factories and from, making stuff for consumers and then shipping them across the ocean to get shot at. You don't do that with your most productive workers, and you don't take your limited resources and instead of making automobiles and stockings and food for your people, you instead start cranking out things that are going to blow up overseas, right? That's not the way to wealth, to prosperity, is to use a lot of your resources doing things that are intrinsically destructive. So again, maybe it's worth the price or the cost to fight the war, but let's not kid ourselves that the cost is actually a benefit. That's the point I'm making here. So very quickly here, these are the last few slides I'll go through. Let me just explain to you, just show you a little bit, because this myth is very well seated, and it's not just it's not just a psychological thing that, it seemed like the factories were humming. No, economists can look at certain statistical facts that apparently justify this view. It kind of looks like on paper, it looks like World War II really did get the economy out of the Depression. And so let me just show you why that's misleading. So the first thing, you could look at the unemployment rate. And you could say, look, the unemployment rate went way up in 1932, 33. It came down a little bit, but then we know it went back up to 19% in 1938. And it started, but it really didn't come down back to normal until the U.S. was full swing into the war effort. And so, doesn't this show that World War II fixed the unemployment problem? So, yes and no. If the goal is just to get unemployed men doing something, well then sure. If you draft millions of people and put them on ships and send them across the ocean, you just took care of the problem. And just like right now, if President Obama took everyone who was unemployed and put them on a ship and sent them across to go fight terrorists or something, he could say, problem solved. Yesterday we had 15 million unemployed people, now we have 0 because I just shipped them all across the ocean. But that's not usually what we mean when we say fixing the economy. Usually we mean that they're finding jobs, producing things that consumers want. Okay, so that's so it is true that the unemployment rate did go down, but I would say the reason it went down was because the government drafted a bunch of people and sucked them out of the economy and sent them across the ocean. So it's not really that this indicator means what we normally think of in peacetime. Let me show you another one that does look on the surface to be more illustrative of the fact that the war seemed to be good for the economy. So this is GDP, gross domestic product, and it's adjusted. It's called real GDP. So it's supposed to be adjusted for price inflation, right? So this is supposed to be showing you how much real stuff gets produced by the economy. You can see in 1929 it was this level. It comes way down, bottoms out in 1933, starts going up under FDR, up, but then there's that 38 recession or depression with a small d, okay, and then it zooms way up, okay, and so this is something that conventional economists now, especially those who are Keynesians, will point to and say, yeah, it was the military spending that finally got us out of the Depression, and that's why they'll say now the government should spend a bunch of money, should borrow and spend a bunch of money to get us out of this rut, because it worked back in the late 30s, early 40s, and it can work again today. They say we don't want to start a world war. We can spend the money on fixing bridges and roads and stuff like that. But the point is, look at how much it helped the economy when the government had to spend a bunch of money to go fight Hitler. Okay, but the problem with that is the way you compute GDP is you just add up how much total spending there is. So you add up private consumption spending, private investment spending, and how much the government spends. And so if you decompose these numbers, which I do in this slide, and I say, well, how much of those those bar heights for a given year are due to government spending, and how much is actually because consumers are spending money on stuff that they want. And you can see the blue lines here. This is the private sector. So the blue line at the height of the war effort, 33 and 34, was lower than it ever had been even at the depths of the Great Depression under Herbert Hoover. Okay, and so it's kind of an illusion to say that, oh, in 1944, GDP was really high, because most of that figure is the green line here, which is government spending. Okay, and so it's not simply like a matter of fairness and to say, oh, well, it's not fair that the government consumes so much of the economy. The point is, those numbers are kind of bogus. That, just for example, if people in the private sector are spending $1 million on automobiles, that's, loosely speaking, that's like $1 million worth of output, because they had, they could spend that money elsewhere. The fact that they choose to spend $1 million on automobiles, that's a proxy. That's, economists use it as a measuring rod. Okay, that's $1 million worth of output. But if the government takes that money from them and then hands it over to military contractors for some missiles or something that have a price tag of $1 million, actually those prices are probably inflated, right? The Pentagon is notorious for overspending on things compared to what a private business would spend for the same stuff. Okay, so the fact that the government spent a bunch of money doesn't really mean that therefore there was that much of real value created. All right, so that's so my point is, some of the standard ways that history books will just matter-of-factly say that either FDR or the New Deal or World War II got us out of the Depression, that it doesn't make sense. First of all, how could it be that a major world war is productive? That doesn't make any sense. And if you look more closely at the data, you can actually see various flaws with the standard interpretation.